Bitcoiners, welcome, welcome, welcome. Come on in for a little Saturday edition of the Breakup. We got a few fun things to talk about today. A few fun things. I'll let my folks stream in. Give it a second, right? I'll have a sip of coffee while I wait. I don't have a fresh coffee this morning, but that's okay. It's the leftovers from the last few minutes. I usually have a coffee every half an hour. Good morning, Justin. Hope you're doing well. I'll see you in a few days in sunny Florida. Good morning, Hassan. Hope you're doing well. Good morning from Texas. We love Texas. I was there a couple weeks ago. Bitcoin Graffiti with the coffee. PH. Good morning, PH. Robert. Good morning. Good morning, Bitcoiners. Bitcoin Graffiti asks, how's Bitcoin conference prep? Really good. No troubles so far. Yeah, it's been smooth sailing, honestly. Real smooth sailing. A little bit of stress before I got all these political folks booked, but I knew they'd come. I knew they'd come. Scoops Bitcoin Graffiti asks, there's a few. I have, all kinds of embargoes that I've signed, so unfortunately I can't really leak too much. You guys have gotten a lot of the leaks, though, as far as who's coming and what's going to go on and all these things. So I think that's the best I can do. And Justin reminds us the sun will definitely be up in Miami. Well, the sun is up this morning, everyone. And I checked, Bitcoin's also running. So all that's left for us to do is have the little bit of coffee I have left here and talk about what's new. You guys are free to drink as much coffee as you have left, obviously, right? So let's start with a little bit of Moscow time. What's going on in Moscow time? Well, this is a good one. So MSNBC is telling us that it's imperative that observers stop seeing the Republicans' debt ceiling crisis as normal and start seeing them as scandalous. So MSNBC says, to see debt ceiling crisis as normal is to miss modern history. So if you complain about the money being spent, you miss history. That's what it says. You miss history. I had to read what he had to say. I had to see what he meant by all of this. I mean, it's like politics, I guess, are the big problem. So here's what he says. That the GOP leaders are threatening to harm Americans on purpose, and to shrug one's shoulders and see this as routine is to miss not only how U.S. politics has traditionally worked, but also how honorable elected officials are supposed to conduct the people's business. MSNBC, thank you for that. That's an excellent takeaway of what's going on, right? With the norms, what's happening, right? I got a good one on the norms, and it's this, right? So the New York Times has a headline today so remember, the norms of criticizing the debt ceiling problem, right? We need new norms. But this one here, the New York Times, Trump's second term goal, shattering the norms he didn't already break. This is a New York Times headline. And Jeremy Call writes, oh no, what would we do without the precious norms the left has used over the past several decades to totally subvert the country? Oh no, what should we do with the norms that are left? That's a pretty good. I normally don't like putting in the punchline, but that one needed it, right? Before we get into more of the Trump thing, I got to let everyone know that there's a new violent but peaceful meme that just dropped, and it was the Title 42 stuff yesterday. So there's an actual MSNBC headline and the Chiron below it, right? We love the Chirons, right? Remember, the Chiron of Janet Yellen, right? Don't audit the Fed with the Bitcoin sign guy. The Chiron really brought the room together. It was the carpet in The Big Lebowski, right? It really tied the room together. So the Chiron and her face with the buy Bitcoin sign, that was everything, right? The Chiron really brought home what was going on. The Chiron being, if you guys don't remember, when Bitcoin sign guy put the sign up, it was Yellen doesn't want to audit the Fed, or argues why you shouldn't audit the Fed, right? Don't don't audit us. We don't need it, right? So here's the new one. So this Chiron has got a journalist sort of looking concerned like this, right? The same as the peaceful, violent, but mostly peaceful protests from the summer of 2020. That's the Chiron I'm talking about. So there's a new one. So you're at the border wall. It's all kinds of chaos behind the border wall, right? People, cameras, refugees, illegal immigrant, everything's there, right? And so the Chiron is border crowded, but not chaotic. The border crowded, but not chaotic. It's we'll see. We'll see how that all goes. So it's the new violent but peaceful Chiron is back. So lots of people talking about the new Twitter CEO situation. And here's how we're going to know, right? Here's how we're going to know what this whole change means. And it looks like this. All right. So Joe Biden tweeted out today. And remember, Joe Biden has made the reason for which he ran in the first place was to prevent Donald Trump from the very fine people and having more very fine people and the Charlottesville thing. And he had to stop neo-Nazism in America. That's a stated reason, and he mentions it all the time, right? And so he tweeted yesterday again on this line saying, there were not fine people on both sides of Charlottesville. The January 6th rioters were not good people. End of story, right? So, and what they did was they had this video of Trump at his town hall talking about January 6th, and they had that same video that you've seen forever. Everyone fighting. That whole same video, right? So here's how we're going to know. We're going to find out about the new CEO. It's 6 weeks, right? It's 6 weeks. But this is one of those. Now, we've seen Twitter do community notes to advertisers, which is amazing. How much credibility do they get that they're willing to fact check their own advertisements? I mean, it's really good, right? So if we ever see a community notes on the president talking about this stuff, it won't matter. It doesn't even matter who's the CEO and what's going on. If the tools operate as they're intended, and we end up seeing fact check on this kind of stuff, because the Charlottesville thing and the January 6th thing together are kind of the alpha hoaxes. They're the hoaxes upon which all other hoaxes are built. If those two come down, the ability to persuade, so to use narrative bias or to draft behind those hoaxes, right? You can sort of use list persuasion. All these other things make sense, right? Drinking bleach, all these other hoaxes can make sense if you just attach it to one hoax that people already believe is true. So you can do that. That's a sort of magic trick. That's a typical magic trick. In fact, that's how magic usually works, right? You distract. You can hypnotism works in a very similar way. Sales work in a very similar way. There's a reason why in sales the car guy gets you to agree to having a glass of water first, or some form of agreeing with what the person is offering. That's a very typical sales maneuver. Simply because once you start getting used to saying yes, you'll say yes to more stuff, right? That's just how it works, right? That's how hypnotism works. When those hypnotists are looking for the people in a crowd that they can hypnotize, and they're sort of saying, I can't do this one, can't do that one, it's because they know they've already got them to agree to something. And therefore, from there on, they're more susceptible and more likely to agree with whatever persuasion is being used. So that's usually how it works, right? So, in this case, if we ever see community notes come into the president, we got nothing to worry about for Twitter as far as it being a useful tool to give context, right? Because that's usually what we need. It's context that's being ripped away from conversations all the time. Aaron Rupar, that's what he does as a job, right? That's his job. He finds videos, cut context. He's the reason why people don't understand that Trump condemned white nationalists and neo-Nazis explicitly and by name in the Charlottesville apology number 2 or 3 or whatever it was. So Trump did that. And the same video where he says very fine people, it's the same press conference where he says very fine people on both sides. Everybody knows it's the most debunked scam hoax in the history of America at this point. Everybody knows. Even the Wall Street Journal will mention that it never happened. They'll correct in their own pages. I believe if you go on the Wikipedia page, it's pretty explicit. A lot of the AI is too stupid to know still. So if you go and ask, I think that new Google Bard is a complete idiot. It's as dumb as Siri and that other idiot Alexa. Like, it's that stupid, right? It doesn't know what's going on in the world. So, but I think they're going to know going forward. And Community Notes in this case is an excellent source. So all that to say, a lot of people commenting on the new Twitter CEO, and it turns out that you really get the sense that people get their information sources from two completely different places at this point, that people live in two entirely separate worlds. That's one of the problems we have, right? People are you've heard the expression one movie, two screens. So that, and we've been saying it for a long time, that lawyers, for example, can look at the exact same document and have complete disagreement. We can all look at the exact same video now and have a complete disagreement. People are looking at this new Twitter CEO that Musk announced yesterday and are seeing two totally different things. So she's either a crazy MAGA supporter because Trump put her in his administration in some minor role, but she was part of the Trump administration. And the opposite, with a lot of people believing that her association with the World Economic Forum means she's a liberal shill. So you get all kinds of people talking about these two extremes. So you have Deva Hazarika, I don't really know how to pronounce his name, Deva Haz, who says the new Twitter CEO is either a far left woke globalist or a far right anti-LGBTQ MAGA. Cat Turd says Elon Musk, the woke mind virus is a threat to the world. Also Elon Musk, I just hired a far left loon deeply infected with the woke mind virus to run Twitter. Twitter 2.0 was fun while it lasted. Get ready for it to suck again. Then you get people saying, here's another one. She's linked to pro-insurrection tweets. She's a right-wing conspiracy theory believer and a MAGA supporter. She shares Musk's far-right views on politics. So Musk asks, is it possible to be LGBTQ anon? Is it possible to be LGBTQ anon? Which is really funny. We're going to know more about the whole situation just by how Community Notes are deployed. We don't need to wait for a lot of track record, right? There's a few items that need Community Notes in the short term before she even arrives in office. And I would suggest it's this January 6th stuff and the Charlottesville stuff. Now, I know that's as spicy as it gets, but that to me is an important thing. So Bitcoin Graffiti, they're going to go on Twitter Spaces. Going to be interesting. I wonder whose Twitter Spaces they're going on, Mario's or their own, or what's happening. I don't know. I'm definitely going to be listening to that. But here's what War Clandestine says. So War Clandestine, who is back in our good graces, of course. We figured out that the Aubrey Huff guy, and indeed, I think Daniel was mentioning, because I remember a few months ago when this Daniel or Aubrey Huff guy, who was on Tucker, said he had a movie deal about his whole thing on COVID. He came out and slammed War Clandestine about his ideas and that he was an agent, an op, a disinformation fella, blah, 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 blah. And so at the time, this probably would have been in February, I said, ooh, we're going to slow down on talking about War Clandestine just until we figure it out. Fog of War. Aubrey Huff looked credible to me. Is that his name? Aubrey Huff? Dr. Aubrey? Anyway, I feel like I'm naming a baseball player all of a sudden, but I could be wrong. The fight between them, I waited a little bit and I had Daniel and a few people show me some of the very things we'd been talking about, right? Whoever's hallucinating and adding facts to the story, usually they're the ones having trouble. Missing a fact is one thing, but adding details to a story, a problem. So it turns out Aubrey, just using the devices we talk about here, we could already detect he was probably the less credible of the two. And it looks like now that's completely true, right? So War Clandestine, we're back to using him as a not just entertaining source, as a credible source, right? Now we could be wrong. We could be wrong. We will keep you updated, right? But War Clandestine, remember, right when this debate started, I appreciated that War Clandestine showed his face. Now, I 100% agree with anonymity stuff and all that, but he was being criticized as being an anon, and that was allowing him to run this deceitful counterintelligence operation or whatever. So he did come on, show his face, and for what it's worth, I appreciated it, just because you want to see someone have skin in the game, in a sense, if they're having these arguments. So not that I believe it's necessary, but it made him more credible to me when he did. So take it for what that is worth. So here's what he says. It was this time last year when Elon was purchasing Twitter that all the same idiots were saying we couldn't trust Elon, that he was just buying Twitter as a trick to implant chips into our brains. Elon proceeded to let huge voices back on the platform, reopen public discourse, remove the political censorship, remove the false fact checks, introduced community notes, red-pilled hundreds of millions of people about COVID, vaccines, conservative censorship, deep state corruption, Fauci, Ukraine, biolabs, etc. And all you think of is that it was just a ploy so Elon could turn around and reintroduce censorship. If he was on their team, he wouldn't have taken Twitter from them in the first place, and he sure as shit wouldn't have aired out all that deep state dirty laundry along the way. Look at all the attacks from the left and the media. Why would they expend so much ammunition attacking Elon if he was on their side? The logic doesn't add up. I'm merely advocating that we put the torches and pitchforks down, considering absolutely nothing negative has happened yet. Shame on me, he says. People, this is another tweet from him. People, she specializes in large-scale streaming services a la Peacock. Elon is trying to bring streaming services to Twitter and expand the capabilities of the app. Elon has a need for her. Elon still controls the tech side of things, makes the final decisions, owns the company, and he can fire her at any time. But if you just want to scream that the sky is falling and you think that more due diligence than the richest man on the planet hiring a CEO for his $44 billion company, do it elsewhere. And this is a thread from Chase Geyser, and Chase has a bit of info on what this woman is like. Twitter hiring Linda Yasserino isn't necessarily a bad thing and may shed some light on some good things in the works. Here's why. It doesn't seem like the new role of CEO will have the authority to change content moderation policy. Elon is stepping up as executive chairman and chief tech officer, overseeing product, software, and SIOPs, or SysOps, pardon me, system operations. Yeah. Reading too much PSYOP stuff. As executive chairman, it looks like he will have a final say, similar to how the board had final say over many of Dorsey's recommendations as CEO. At NBC Universal, Yasserino was responsible for launching the ad-based streaming service Peacock. It looks like her experience is particularly in line with updates and improvements to live streaming and multimedia content on the platform. This could be a play to make changes and expand the way creators can use Twitter, as well as the way Twitter can actually start making a profit. Previous tweets relating to her support for masks, the vaccines, and the WEF are a cause for concern, but Elon has vocally opposed much of that and will still remain chairman. It seems that her role as CEO is to get Twitter making money and to make it a better place for creators, users, ultimately not a policy role. By hiring someone who A, seems to be of the left, and B, is highly skilled at executing what Twitter very specifically needs right now, and C, tightening the rope of the role of CEO while maintaining authority as executive chairman, Elon will have avoided unnecessarily alarming / provoking Democrats on the platform, set Twitter up for dramatic increases in ad revenue along with improved creator features / opportunities, and neutralize the threat of censorship returning to the platform. And I'm going to say it's going to add one more element. All right. And here's what I think. Now, I don't know what her politics are. I don't know that, but it doesn't look like she fits neatly into Republican or Democrat. And I would say that's the case of the majority of Americans who aren't getting prompt engineered by political parties, right? That's the majority, right? I disagree with Republicans all the time. You have to, right? You have to. It's the way the game is designed to work. You've got to disagree. And so I don't think myself and many Bitcoiners anyway don't fit into a neat, tight package of Republican or Democrat. They might be more insulted or grossed out or disgusted by one party or the other, right? That's true. I'm certainly more disgusted regularly by Democrats than I am Republicans. But Republicans are pretty gross as well when you get deep into the swamp of the uniparty and the political structures and the fundraising. And just look at fentanyl. They're disgusting. They're disgusting on fentanyl, the Republicans. Disgusting. They could have stopped so much of this stuff when they had the chance, have never really got their minds around what's going on, what a big problem it is. It's all seen through partisan lenses. It's all seen through points on Democrats, not really even talking about the death toll that continues to rise day by day by day. So what Elon looks like he's modeling is almost a reconciliation, showing Republicans, Democrats, people who have nuanced political opinions working together. I think, and even that Twitter doesn't seem like it's coming from one camp, let's say, and that it has some form of bipartisanship baked into the executive, baked into the corporate structure, I think ends up modeling for all of us something we're going to see more and more about, especially with the challengers in the race right now for president. So the challengers in the race for president of the United States are along these new partisan lines, or breaking down of old partisan lines, I should say. That's probably a better way to categorize it. So look at RFK, right? RFK sounds more right-wing, or however you want to call it, than Trump on many issues, especially the vaccine stuff, right? So here's a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't know about the vaccine that RFK was talking about. He was on the Russell Brand podcast, and this is probably the most useful frame I've ever heard for understanding what happened for COVID. And I've listened to a lot of RFK's content. I've listened to a lot of his arguments. I get the point of his book. I haven't read the book, but I sort of have watched enough interviews about him discussing the book, so get a sense of where it's going. But on Russell Brand's podcast yesterday, he talked about the CIA and how warp speed and all of these COVID measures had nothing to do with healthcare. Now, that conceptually and intellectually, but the way he says it here puts a whole different sort of frame to it. And I find this the best frame I've ever heard. And, again, this is what I mean about Republican Democrat. Trump is the institutor of warp speed, right? Now, I agree. Trump has many enemies with the deep state, is no friend of the deep state. And I would feel confident if he was president again that he would finally this time, right? I'm not supporting him because he didn't do enough to destroy the deep state last time. But I do think if he has another chance, he hates them enough that he would do it this time. I believe that, right? But by seeing Democrats now really staking out more libertarian, right-wing, freedom, decentralized, less authority, bottom-up control, not top-down control, you're seeing it come from a Democrat candidate, RFK. He's more in line with, I think, what most small government Bitcoiners believe about COVID and the vaccines than Trump is, right? And I'll mention a little bit about what I mean about the modeling Republican and Democrat together, because it has a role to play when we consider what's going on with Vivek, and maybe we will have a cross-party ticket, right? We would love to see a cross-party ticket. So here we go. This is RFK on Rusty Rockets on Russell Brand's show yesterday, right? So talking about warp speed. This is some of the most fascinating stuff you're ever going to hear. So Robert F. Kennedy Jr. details how the NSA was in charge of Operation Warp Speed and the mRNA vaccines, the history of the United States bioweapons program, and why Anthony Fauci is the highest paid government official in history. Did you know that? I didn't. So here's the quotes. The weird thing about the pandemic was this constant involvement by the CIA, the intelligence agencies, and the military. When Operation Warp Speed made its presentation to the FDA committee called VRBPAC, when Warp Speed turned over the organizational charts that were classified at the time, it shocked everybody because it wasn't HHS, CDC, NIH, FDA, or a public health agency. It was the NSA, a spy agency that was at the top and led Operation Warp Speed. The vaccines were developed not by Moderna or Pfizer. They were developed by NIH. They own the patents. Their own patents are owned 50% by the NIH. Nor were they manufactured by Pfizer or Moderna. They were manufactured by military contractors, and basically Pfizer and Moderna were paid to put their stamps on those vaccines as if they came from the pharmaceutical industry. This was a military project from the beginning. I didn't know that. I did not know that. Honestly, I did not know that. And I cover this stuff, right? I did not understand any of this. One of the things I uncovered in my book is 20 different simulations on coronavirus and pandemics that started in 2001. The first one was right before the anthrax attacks, and the CIA sponsored them all. The last one was Event 201, which was in October 2019. And one of the participants was Avril Haines, the former deputy director of the CIA, who has been managing cover-ups her whole life. She did the Guantanamo Bay and others. She is now the director of national intelligence, which makes her the highest ranking officer at the NSA, which managed the pandemic. So you have a spy who is convening these pandemic simulations, and in each of these simulations going back 20 years, they're not simulating a public health response. They're not doing things like, how do we stockpile vitamin D? How do we get people outdoors losing weight doing exercise? How do we develop an information grid for all the 15 million frontline doctors all over the world so that we can get their information that works and what doesn't work? We had an incredible opportunity to manage a pandemic in a way that was intelligent and sensitive and devastating to the disease, but we didn't do any of those things. It was all about, how do you use a pandemic to clamp down censorship? How do you use it to force lockdowns? By the way, with lockdowns, every pandemic preparedness document that had been adopted by any major public health agencies, whether it was the CDC, WHO, European Health Agency, National Health Services of Britain, all of them said, you don't do lockdowns. You quarantine the sick, you protect the vulnerable, and you let everybody else go back to work, because a lockdown actually amplifies the impacts of the disease. If you isolate people, it makes them more vulnerable. It breaks down their immune system. It's amazing. I mean, amazing that someone is so clearly talking about what happened. And it makes the whole pandemic seem to make more sense to me now. I was in New York. I was in New York City when the body bags were piling up in March, April 2020. And I had I had a feeling, and remember, I've said many times, I said I expected nothing from Clown World. So I never thought they would get anything right. But I kept wondering why it wasn't a call to arms to young people, because I'd already had COVID. I was willing to run around town and get people groceries. I would have done that all day, all day. If someone had come to me and said, you can do these things, you can help people this way, you can help people that way, I think many young people would have. And just as if you'd have asked the old people who wanted to stay in, hey, do you guys mind staying in for a few years while the young people go out and keep the world running properly, and then send you food and all the other stuff? I'd said they say the same thing too, right? A lot of people were willing to sacrifice, but the way we ended up sacrificing, being alone, was the worst possible outcome. And I watched the parks and the mental health deteriorate in New York City of people living in the parks. I saw all the kind of trouble. And that's why I had to leave. I consider myself a refugee. No kidding. I do. And it's kind of, people don't always take it seriously, but it wasn't my choice to leave New York City. It wasn't my choice. I had to. There was no life there anymore. There was not a good place for kids. And I had to go. Right now, I still miss New York City. Everybody misses New York City. It's not what it was. So you can't go back. There's no going back. It's gone, right? I think something else will come in its place. I think it will be reborn one day as a great place. And some people tell me it's great these days. It's okay. It's not as bad as I was worried, but it's not as great as it once was. But this loneliness piece, right? This idea that the most vulnerable and the weakest psychologically, the weakest physically, were left alone even more, right? Because I've said for a long time, you got the fentanyl, you got phones. Something I've noticed, if I'm with my friends, and I have a phone, everyone, I have a phone addiction, I'll admit it, right? I know how to put it down, and I have the right attention span. I have all kinds of systems that keep me from suffering. I live a very healthy outdoor life, all those things, right? So I'm not worried about my addiction. I often say addiction is the operating system. You have to choose what you're addicted to, and one of those things is the dopamine hit of the internet and information and all of those things. I don't watch any movies or television, but I certainly jump into YouTube. I think YouTube is the greatest form of entertainment in the world. I can spend hours on YouTube and learn and have fun and watch all kinds of great channels. But what I noticed is it's easy to not bother with your phone or even think about it, right? I don't have to use those systems of distraction that I would use, or set times when I do other things that aren't online, because I do that a lot. You know, I spend my afternoon with my children, for example, and I don't let myself use my phone, and that works real well. And it's one of the ways I make sure I have a lot of outdoor laughing and playing with people. And I, of course, I love my children. I love spending time with them. But the other way is if you just are around your normal friends, right? If you're around your normal friends, the last thing I do is look for my phone, right? It's just fun to chat and be with people. And it's not a burden at all to not put your phone, to not look at your phone. When I'm with my kids and they're playing at a park, I'll have to stop myself from taking my phone out and just being on my phone while the kids are playing, right? And even sometimes I do it. Even sometimes I say, don't worry, I gotta know about this, right? I got a message, I gotta check it out. So you never get that when you're with your friends. So this whole thing that we see, everyone fighting online, every issue becoming a huge pitched battle, all kinds of people addicted to their phones. And it's not so much addicted to the phones, it's addicted to the dopamine of being self-righteous. I want to see, it's the same for me, right? When I see what are the Bitcoiners excited about today, right? That makes me feel good because I'm on the right path, and I think, we're able to tackle these major problems. And, it's a normal appeal to your own self-interest and your own selfishness. And we don't want to criticize that. It's normal, right? It's normal even for the crazy woke mind virus people, right? They're all living with the same operating system that we as Bitcoiners have. It's the same thing, right? They're just being misled and brought down a path that probably isn't as fruitful as the one Bitcoiners are pushing forward, right? And the new world we're constructing with this sort of community, right? So this whole notion of loneliness and isolation really is what allowed for think about how much more political fighting became in the summer of 2020 after the lockdowns. I didn't leave because of COVID. That's not why I left New York City, right? COVID was whatever. I wasn't afraid of the germs. Like the germs, there's no one wore a mask in May 2020. I stayed in a hotel Memorial Day weekend on Atlantic Beach, on Long Beach, which is the beach just north of the city on Long Island. I rented a hotel. There were people in the hotel. They had no linens. They had to bring your own linens because everyone was afraid of COVID. There's no mask mandate back then. May 2020, everyone just walked around and did their own thing. I wasn't afraid of the germs. But what you saw was that isolation led to even more fighting online. Where do you think all the protests started? That's why we left. It wasn't the protests themselves. It was the violence that came with the protest and the amount of violence on the streets in Brooklyn that made it unlivable for a family with kids, right? You just had to go. So the loneliness part that seeped in just continued right through the elections. I mean, I've probably never felt more isolated than when the week after the election, when things were really getting locked down in Canada, because I ran away to Canada, and in October 2020 during the elections, and then early November 2020 during the elections, or after the election, that week after the election, when it was like, what the hell just happened there? Even though I knew, I was predicting all over there was going to be no credible result to the election, that we would be in a world of two presidents, and it would be even more confusing. Think about how much fighting was going on then. You could barely have a conversation with a colleague, right? It was even more isolated than ever before. And there was a few people I could talk to, right? So we would talk, but you couldn't just go out and talk to people about things normally, right? We were isolated, we weren't talking, and it made the addiction to the phone even worse, right? Even worse. And so all of that makes me think of two things that have just happened in the past couple of days. The first, you got to see this. Her name is Karen Marjorie. Karen Marjorie. She's a 23-year-old Snapchat influencer, and she made an AI version of herself called CarynAI. And she charges about $1 a minute. She made $71,000 this week. And she says she's going to be earning about $5 million a month. Now, you could imagine she's a beautiful young girl, right? The minute you see her pictures and the way she talks, you're like, I would pay for that, you know? But now I'm not going to. I don't have any of these, you know, I'm not looking for any female companionship. But what you can start seeing is, and people have asked me, what do I think are the best business cases around AI? It's the loneliness thing. It's by far the loneliness thing, right? Because AI is way better than any friend or even a partner, probably, right? AI is going to be 100% empathetic towards you, 100% attention on you, and will be a different experience from being buried in a device and apps and all of those things. Now, it's still technology, right? But it's going to have much more human interactions, and it's going to change how we think of things. And how do we know it's going to be so useful? And how do we know it's going to overtake the phone? Well, here's something that a lot of people aren't picking up. So some people thinking Apple terrible with AI, and indeed Siri is a complete moron, right? One of the dumbest idiots you'll ever come across as a product, just a complete moron. But here's what's happening at Apple. About a month from now, Apple is going to announce, this is according to Michael Gimmerin, right? About a month from now, Apple is going to announce support for using its silicon neural engine to run commercial and open source LLMs on the iPhone. So they're not going to be developing their own, right? They're not going to be doing Microsoft incorporating ChatGPT. They're going to let their phone use its compute power for you to train your own LLM, your own AI. And Michael says this will enable the work of Brian Rommel is currently popularizing to come to Apple's entire ecosystem. So the argument here is that you're going to get exactly what I've been saying, your personal eyeball, your own AI housed now in your phone, which will completely change the business model around apps and how it functions and how they interact. But you're going to get a complete and total AI friend built into your phone, which will really be your phone. And it's going to help you navigate all of this loneliness stuff. So bring it back to what I'm saying about RFK, these other all the other challengers doing a great job to break down orthodox political lines, right? Vivek has all kinds of interesting proposals, right? He's talking about bombing Mexico now, right? He's on the Mexico bombing plan, which I've been saying for a while is going to happen because of the drugs. So you get Vivek, you get even DeSantis, who came out strongly opposed to the CBDC, made it illegal yesterday. I don't know if you saw that. The CBDC deployment in Florida now, totally illegal. I don't know what that means, but he did it, right? So what you're going to start to see, I think, are these sort of cross-partisan lines. So I do think you're going to see a cross-party ticket. I do think someone like Vivek and someone like RFK are going to come together, and you could see a completely different ticket if those two come together. So what Elon Musk is doing with this new CEO is a very similar modeling of cross-partisan, bipartisan coming together and coming up with a whole new frame to deal with things. Now, AI itself is going to be instrumental in helping us integrate into this new orchestration, right? It's going to prevent us from getting spun by either political side, the same way isolation and political spin drove people further apart in COVID lockdown times and in all the polarizing effects of the election, and how we became even more polarized in that time. It can change. and we can suddenly find more common ground than we've maybe ever had. And the loneliness factor is, I think, what contributed to the susceptibility of being spun. We're going to have more bipartisan, nonpartisan, new partisan fault lines that will come. And exactly what RFK is selling here, this idea that the COVID lockdown was way more national security operation than was ever healthcare. You wouldn't have heard that from a Republican. You didn't hear that from a Republican in the last cycle, right? Trump, as much as he's going to say he's an enemy of the deep state and all these people, I don't know if he really had them sized up properly. Now, that's a lot for me to say. I have nothing but respect for Trump's war against the deep state, except for the times when he's fucked it up totally, which is, as we've said many times, no pardon for Ed, no pardon for Julian, and no releasing of the JFK documents. So he had a chance. He chose to sort of butterfinger the NSA during his time as president. Promises he's going to fix it next time, but I mean, it's a little hard. He has a credibility issue there. He really does. No kidding, he does. And RFK is much more effective, lands much more of his punches against the NSA and the COVID situation than Trump does. And you wouldn't necessarily think that, right? You wouldn't necessarily think that. So that's what we got going on there. And you can even see it starting to come. One of the videos yesterday that had so much amplification, I don't know if you saw it, but it was a video of a bunch of people protesting, testimony, making speeches or whatever in Chicago. And it was the South Shore of Chicago that had a whole list of residents that came to protest and discuss the 500 migrants that are coming to their area. And this is a county that voted 97% for Joe Biden, right? So 97% for Joe Biden, they voted in the last election. And here they are saying basically America first, right? How can we pay for all these people that are coming when we have so much trouble in our own house? It's crazy. It doesn't make any sense. You're going to start to see these new effects that are going to start tearing down the old political lines. And swirling up underneath it is this opportunity to create new alliances and new groups that don't fit into the old model, right? So go back to this Linda Yasserino lady, right? They say she's got the WEF connections, but just as easily people say that she's a MAGA election denying person, right? By them modeling, and even the spaces that is going to happen today that people were reminding me of in the comments, you're going to hear a different battlefield than you've ever heard by seeing people like this together on stage, defending their points of view and really pushing for new equilibrium, new alliances that will change the fault lines of the battlefield that we've all come to get used to. So, this thing in Chicago is a perfect example. These people are primed to completely abandon their previous political affiliations. I said for a long time that Trump was going to earn. So when Trump was president in 2016, 2017, I would tell everyone he's actually going to win the black vote. That's the key to him being winning a second term. I was wrong. It didn't happen. But I still see that trend. I still see the trend of the particularly demographic changes in the voting habits of Americans are going to have a massive effect. And you're going to see these new alliances. So I do see a lot of people who are waking up and saying, okay, well, immigration is actually a simple equation, right? Not a lot of emotions involved, but you're able to take so many in. And, the immigration plan that Trump and others have been suggesting for America is really just the Canadian immigration plan, by the way. Canada uses a point system, and they just changed the level of points required to enter the country depending on how many immigrants they want that year. So, and you get points for having a job, you get points for going to school in Canada, you get a point for speaking English, you get a point for speaking French, you get a bonus if you speak both. It's just a simple point system. It just tries to predict if people would do well in Canada based on what they've got already. And in any year, they can say, oh, it takes, it's a 100-point scale. In any year, they can say, oh, this year it's 71 points to immigrate to Canada. Oh, this year we need more. It's 69 points, right? They can change the number anytime. And that's an easy fix. The points and the allocation of the points will determine how many people can make it. So that's basically all Trump was suggesting. And I think you're going to have a lot of conversation about that going forward. You're going to have people that will, because in America, of course, it's a lottery. That's how you get the craziest outcomes, right? So I think you're going to start to see these new breakdowns, and it's going to be interesting stuff. All right, let's see what some of these comments say. I think a lot of people commenting on CarynAI. I have his book, and I've listened to like 8 of the 28 hours that Johnny Rico says. Yeah. Let's go back. P-Man Van. So it amazes me that reaction before reasoning has become the norm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, but you're going to see it, P-Man. I think you're going to see it. Bitcoinomic says Elon is controlled opposition. I don't think he's controlled. Could be wrong. I don't think so. Anyway, we don't have to know the answer necessarily. We keep getting opportunities because of his ownership. And if that stops, then we'll complain about it, right? But so far, yeah, she did work for Comcast, which is a big X, right? That's a big X. But who knows? I think there's more nuance. Yeah, I think Johnny's talking about nuance to the controlled opposition part. The CARES Act. I don't know if I was talking about the CARES Act as I was talking about Operation Warp Speed. I can't keep them all straight, though. Good morning, Joe. Oh, that's it. Wow, I think Jared is commenting here on the useful frame that I was mentioning about the NSA being in charge of Operation Warp Speed, and the interesting quotes that came from RFK's interview on Russell Brand's show. So indeed, really amazing stuff. Robert also with a wow. Yeah, it's pretty crazy stuff. Military pays Fauci, I heard. Could be. The financial collapse began surfacing in summer 2009 with overnight QE. As soon as COVID appeared on MSN, I thought that this was the way of dealing with the crisis. Yeah, Bushmaster 6, I was giving, if there was any fairness in these stupid journalism awards, I was with CoinDesk that summer, and I was running around complaining about the repo market thing. And I got laughed at on all mainstream media shows. I mean, all of them. They're like, "Oh, come on, you guys don't get it. It's technical. Don't you Bitcoiners understand? It's just banks settling between themselves. Who cares, right?" So my prediction there in this, you can go and find the videos. I was on CNN, Fox, all of them, right? CNBC, and because that's how generally it worked. Number go up, number go down, or a hack, and we would be on the air. We were the only financial publication, CoinDesk at the time, talking about the reverse repo market and the repo rumble and what was going on there. We were the only one. No one else would talk about it, right? I had Joe Weisenthal. I brought him to an event, and he did the same. Oh, you cute little Bitcoiners, you're so dumb. Ha ha ha. Don't you know banks? Ha, so complicated. Don't you know about complicated stuff, you idiots? I mean, that was basically his point, right? Just kind of laughing and snickering. And that's how a lot of people were handling this. Now, I kept saying in September 2019, you're gonna don't know what's going on with this. This is QE, and it's not going to stop. And the only thing I see on the horizon is a much bigger printing of money, which we had. I didn't know anything about COVID, nothing about COVID, but I said you're going to have a major event which forces more printing. And I said it live on all those television networks because it was obvious. There was no way out, right? There was no way out of the situation unless there was massive stimulus given to the system, which is really just a form of life support, right? And that's what we were saying. That's why it's relevant to Bitcoiners, because it is psychologically important to understand that when the system is falling apart, and no one knows what's going on and can understand it, that's sort of how Bitcoin will grow, right? By the inability for the other system to make sense of the world around you is really what Bitcoin's big advantage is, because Bitcoin is infinity over 21 million. It's the denominator of Bitcoin that allows you to measure the world and therefore make a more useful reference rate for the economy than any of this other gobbledygook shit they come up with. So we said it publicly. And as I said, if there was truly journalism awards, CoinDesk won a bunch of awards for the SBF thing, right? We would have won them all in 2019 if there was any reasonable, if it wasn't the NSA in charge of vaccines, we would have won, every single one of these awards. Johnny Rico says, my wife is so addicted to her phone all day long, scrolling and talking with friends and streaming. I don't know how to help. Systems, it's not a discipline thing, right? No one has discipline. That doesn't work. Systems, Johnny, is my suggestion. Just like I mentioned, when I take the kids out, no phones, right? Leave your phone at home. Don't take it out. So the best way you can do is legitimately competing against it, right? Discipline isn't going to work. You can compete against it, though. And by compete against it, I mean have more stimulating and fulfilling activity at certain times. Make that a habit. Do it every day. It could be a walk. It could be anything. But it's just about, getting, it could be with friends in real life too. Friends in real life is the best antidote to phone addiction, by the way. Again, if you're with a bunch of friends at dinner, no one even looks for their phone. It's without question, you won't bother. You won't be distracted. You won't even think about it. So people yearn for connection. They yearn for interacting with people. And that's part of the reason why the phones are so addictive. So I personally use systems and I compete against it. It's with my kids, for example. I don't do any of that. Oh, you had too much time on the iPad today. Oh, nope. Just pure competition. That's it. Pure competition. Now, not easy, right? I've got to live on a beach and a ski hill and a farm and a city and all kinds of stuff. But it works, right? So my kids will put down their iPads. They'll go for days without playing with them. They won't even think about them. And there you go. So that's my advice, Johnny. That's what seems to work for me. It's just better systems, right? Just better systems. Because we're all addicted, Johnny. That's the problem. It's not just your wife. It's all of us. We all have a very similar prone to addiction to this thing. So coordinated nations shutdown. It looks like it. Looks like it. Johnny says, I didn't vote because I knew there was no point. Yeah, I get it. I would still vote, or 5 times if you can. Cheat. Come on. The whole system's fake. People pay $1 to chat with an AI. They sure do. And I think they're going to go more, Bob. I think they're going to go way more. We have gone so low. Yeah. Dex with the coffee, the hands up. Love it, Dex. Thanks. Johnny Rico says, I've heard of AI development for companionship for the elderly. Yeah, you're going to get it for young people too. You're going to get it for a lot of young people too. Vaccines are not a left versus right issue. They shouldn't be, the empath. They became one, unfortunately. Almost everything in this world, even, like we talk about stuff here all the time, and we're usually ahead of things. So we get our sort of third rail take on the board before anyone. But eventually you revert to, you just can't help it. There's so much spin coming from either side. No matter what your opinion is, it will just get pushed into one of the polarities. That seems to be, it's hard to even keep your own opinion after a while. It seems to just get pushed that way, which is a bummer. Grandchildren creating AI and using it on grandparents. Yeah, I think you're going to see that. Yeah, this is the CarynAI. Yeah, your virtual girlfriend. Yeah. And she'll cancel if you're rude to her. She'll cancel if you're rude to her, P-Man, are you going to the picnic today? Yeah, I might. That's a good, he says Punic, but it's picnic. So yeah, I may actually. I haven't RSVP'd yet, but I probably will. I probably will go. Yeah. Um, there is no way RFK would run on the same platform as someone who wants to bomb Mexico. Did Vivek really say he wants? Yeah, he did. A lot of people are saying they're going to bomb Mexico. What's Vivek's actual quote? Here it is. We are ready to use our military to annihilate the Mexican drug cartels south of the border. So yeah. And Vivek says in a follow-up, when people were shocked that he said that, he says, this is not only the solution to the problem. This is not the only solution to the problem. We must work on the mental health epidemic that contributes to the demand side of the problem. But we must hit the supply side hard too. It'll be honest. I'll be honest about both. So the argument here is that Mexico is not a real country, right? So if you're bombing, now the people obviously are real, but the government is owned by the cartels. So it's not the way someone would recognize a nation state. It's a cartel. And what he's saying is he won't distinguish between drug dealers and a fake government that's propped up by the drug dealers. He'll just smash them. And I think a lot of people are sort of down with that, right? Like, I think fentanyl is such a big problem, and I wouldn't, you got to know this about RFK Jr. He was a drug addict as a young man. Did you know that? Did you know he was a drug addict, like a recreational drug addict? So, of all the people who understand the scourge of recreational drugs, I would say RFK is in a great position and doesn't hide his previous drug abuse either. So, I wouldn't be so sure if he wouldn't bomb Mexico. I wouldn't be so sure. All right, I'm gonna have to run here, but let's see. Let me see this. How long will the Bitcoin adoption curve take? When it doesn't seem to adopt as fast as other tech. Perception is what it truly is hard to perceive. Perception of what it truly is hard to perceive. Yeah. I continue to think that the closest and shortest path for Bitcoin is what I was talking about yesterday with the energy markets. Bitcoin adoption, it's not the same as a cell phone. It is a psychological engine. That's why we talk in terms of psychology here a lot. And I agree, perception of what it is hard to perceive. True. But the wealthiest participants in our system being the energy companies, them wanting to preserve their wealth versus a nation state, will actually model it for the whole rest of the world. So them separating themselves from the NSA and from the logic of violence and for the returns on violence that the nation state afforded them, I think is going to drive them to Bitcoin. And that would overnight. It's an overnight situation after that. It's overnight, right? I'm going to keep testing out my idea to build a Bitcoin settled energy market. And if that thing would take off, the game's over in 4 years. It's done. We win. Done. If it got enough traction as an energy market, it would be over. Right? So I think we're going to get there. Oh, Ollie, the U.S. is a cartel. No doubt. The banks are a cartel, 100%. And they're the most important cartel in the world. I'll even say, like, all these talks about election interference, China, fentanyl, TikTok, Mexico, what's going on. I don't even worry about them in a sense, because they're just not as competitive as the US domestic cartels at manipulating our system. Not even close. Like, people can say, oh, Russia influenced our election. Let them try. Like, they're up against the actual greatest drug dealers in the history of the world, American cartel interests. So 100% America is not what we think it is. Unfortunately, Americans are who we think they are, most of them. The American spirit is a real thing. American exceptionalism is a real thing. But America, the country, it's a scam. It's a total scam, right? So adoption needs to happen as an energy cell. It'll move to individual. Yeah, it'll move to individual. It would be like, take the economic reforms that went into Reformation 500 years ago. They had all that land, and in the end, it was like private wine makers that separated money and state, or church and state, right? Weirdly, like it wasn't, arms makers, what they were at the time, right? Standing armies that would go with a nation state, but really it was the economic unleashing of new agricultural land and new agricultural systems as feudalism changed. But it was really the separation of the monopoly of land that the church held in Europe that started changing the whole scenario towards a completely different organizing principle. So, in the same way that the early winemakers, believe it or not, the winemakers of Europe had a lot to do with competing directly against nation states, using the land in new ways, and or not nation states, religious states, and the legislative control that the church had, because it was such a large landowner, went away when new economic interests in the land were unlocked based on really changing church spending, right? That was it. And so it creates a society that comes after. So, I mean, it was more complicated, the Reformation, than I'm describing. There were more economic interests. So I'm simplifying by saying winemakers. There were many more. But it's the same logic, right? These participants, it's like, it's the reason why crypto and all the scammy coins are a good thing for Bitcoin, because we needed to influence Wall Street first, and we did it on their own terms with this weird, scammy shit coins that they loved. They loved them, right? Eventually, it teaches people about what a scammy shitcoin is, what Bitcoin is that's different. So it's not an overnight process. It's not a benediction of like anointing people as Bitcoiners. There's a process. Learning about financial literacy sometimes means you got to go through losing money on a shitcoin before you understand what it is you're doing. And so in the same way that we used crypto to influence Wall Street and start changing perceptions about Bitcoin slowly, through a weird learning process, we're going to do it with energy as well. And by doing it with energy, once the energy companies become just like you already have sort of banks and financial institutions. Let's say Fidelity, right? Like Fidelity is Fidelity director of global macro said yesterday, Bitcoin is an aspirational, high-powered inflation hedge. So just as you have banks today that fall on the side of wanting to preserve their wealth and getting Bitcoin against the government, and sort of you can see the beginnings of a cleavage between money and state when these actors start behaving that way. The energy companies doing it is going to be a much bigger model for everyone to follow. So and they'll start breaking just like the banks, right? Many will break towards Bitcoin. Some will say, "Oh, I don't want to do stupid shit," right? I like the NSA's bombing and giving me markets for free by taking them from other participants. So there you go. There you go. Yeah, it's the big club and you ain't invited. Yeah. It's called the American Dream because you have been asleep to believe it. Yeah. And it's a big club and you ain't in it. Yeah. 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 Needs to happen as energy settlement. It'll go that way. It'll go that way in the end. People will start using it to orient their own lives, right? Thank you, Nolan. Are addicting to me. Good. Yeah. AI is addicting. Yeah. Yeah. Choose me as an addiction, guys. Go for it. Better than the phone in the morning and doom scrolling. Sorry, I wasn't able to. Yeah, no problem, man. All right. Cool, team. Peace. Thanks for coming this morning. Slow news day, but lots going on anyway. See ya. Not tomorrow. No show tomorrow. Monday.